last but not least, the slippery slope. Now this only becomes a fallacy sometimes. There's something called a slippery slope argument. And that basically objects to an idea or action because it opens the door to drastic and unfavorable results. The slippery slope fallacy is what happens when the argument isn't given good reasons. So there are plenty of examples, but sometimes it's used to demonize minorities or movements. And here's one example from Pat Robertson, and this is a great example of the slippery slope fallacy. He says this, quote, "You mark my word, if they, meaning Muslims, if they start bringing thousands and thousands of Muslims into that relatively rural area, the next thing you know, they're going to take over the city council. Then they're going to be having a public ordinance that calls for public prayers 5 times a day. Then they're going to be having ordinances for foot washing in all of the public restrooms, etc., etc. And before long, they're going to demand, and little by little, the citizens of this town are going to be cowed." So this is Pat Robertson of the 700 Club. He said this in 2010 in response to attempts by some people in that town to build an Islamic center. It's in the state of Tennessee. Now, what makes this a slippery slope fallacy is that only 1% of the town was Muslim. This is a ridiculous argument. It would be wrong if one religion was crowding out all other religions. That in the United States, which celebrates a religious diversity, that would be wrong. But as it is right now, this is fallacious reasoning. There is also a caveat to the slippery slope fallacy, and you should know this. Some slopes are slippery. It's not always fallacious to talk about a slippery slope. So, for example, there were people in 2007 that predicted the coming economic collapse if lending policies didn't change. So you remember people were given mortgages they couldn't afford, and there were people in 2005, 2006, and 2007 that were saying this practice needs to stop, or we will have an almost total economic meltdown. Well, that wasn't necessarily a slippery slope fallacy, because in retrospect, that's exactly what happened. We had an economic meltdown as a result of, or contributed to by those policies.